Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to stand before you today to share a message of hope, faith, and the incredible power of surrendering to God. Today, we're going to talk about something truly remarkable, the miracles that happen when we leave it to God. You see, in life, we often find ourselves striving. We chase after goals, we make plans, we work tirelessly, and yet sometimes it feels as though we're running against the wind. We ask ourselves, why isn't this working? What's missing? And the answer often lies in the simple truth we're trying to do it all by ourselves. But when we stop trying to control everything and choose to trust in God, something extraordinary happens. Miracles begin to unfold. God's plan for us is always greater than our own. We may think we know what we need or what we want, but His wisdom is beyond our comprehension. I know that when we face trials, we often want answers right away. But let me remind you, God's timing is perfect. He sees the big picture. And when we trust Him with our lives, He leads us exactly where we need to go. Just as He led the Israelites through the desert to a land of promise, He's leading us too. And so we come to the power of surrender. Surrendering to God doesn't mean that we are weak. In fact, it takes great strength to let go of our own understanding and to trust that God will do what we cannot. We may not see the way forward, but we can be assured that He is already there, preparing the way for us. Here's the thing, miracles begin with faith. They are born from belief in something bigger than ourselves, belief in a God who can do all things, even the impossible. When you look at the Bible, you see example after example of miracles that were activated by faith. A woman touched the hem of Jesus' garment and was healed. A young boy gave his lunch to Jesus, and with it, He fed thousands. These weren't just stories, these were acts of faith that unlocked the miraculous. Now, I know that there are moments when life looks impossible. Maybe your dreams feel far out of reach. Maybe your health is failing. Maybe your relationships are broken. But here's what I want you to understand. When you leave it to God, He works in the impossible. What seems like a mountain to you is nothing more than a hill to Him. I've seen people who were counted out by the world experience come back so miraculous that only God could take credit. And that same God is ready to work miracles in your life today. But in order to receive those miracles, we must let go of fear and doubt. Fear is a thief. It steals your peace, it steals your joy, and it steals your faith. When we choose to trust God, we must also choose to let go of anxiety, fear, and worry. The Bible reminds us that perfect love casts out fear. God's love is perfect. And it's more than enough to eliminate the doubts that hold us back from the extraordinary life He has for us. I want to leave you with this: live with an expectation of miracles. Don't wait for life to settle down or for things to look perfect. Trust God right where you are, in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the uncertainty. Just surrender your will to His, let go of control, and believe that with Him all things are possible. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to have it all figured out. But if you trust Him, surrender fully, and walk by faith, you will begin to see the miracles that you've been praying for. Your life will never be the same. It's a true blessing to be here with you today, standing in the presence of so much potential, so much hope, and so much possibility. Today, I want to talk about something that has the power to completely transform the way we live, something that can open the door to the miracles we've been waiting for. That thing is faith. But more than just faith, it's the power of surrender, surrendering to God, letting go of control and trusting Him with everything. We live in a world that constantly tells us we need to be in control. We're taught that if we work hard enough, plan enough, and strategize enough, we can bend the universe to our will. We chase after goals, we fight for our dreams, and we do everything in our power to shape our lives exactly the way we want them. And yet, How often do we find ourselves frustrated, exhausted, and overwhelmed, wondering why things aren't turning out the way we hoped? What if I told you that there's a different way? A way that doesn't require us to be in control of every detail. A way that frees us from the burden of striving. A way that invites miracles into our lives. That way is faith. But not just any faith, faith that leads us to surrender. Faith that allows us to let go and trust that God knows what's best for us, even when we can't see it. There's a kind of peace that comes when we finally release the weight of trying to control everything. It's not a peace that comes from understanding all the answers, because let's be honest, sometimes life doesn't make sense. But it's a peace that comes from knowing that the creator of the universe is in control, that his plan for us is far greater than anything we could imagine, and that all we have to do is trust him. Surrender is not about weakness. It's not about giving up or giving in. It's about strength to admit that we can't do it all on our own, strength to release the fear that holds us back, and strength to place our lives, our dreams, and our struggles into the hands of the one who created us. When we surrender, we make room for God to step in and do what we cannot. We open our hearts to the miraculous, to the impossible, to the kind of transformation that only he can bring. Imagine for a moment what it would feel like to let go of the constant pressure to figure everything out. What if we could wake up every day knowing that we don't have to carry the weight of our circumstances, our struggles, or our future alone? What if we could live with the assurance that the creator of the universe, the one who holds the stars in place, is guiding us, is directing our paths, and is working everything together for our good? That's what happens. When we talk about surrendering to God, it's essential to understand that God's plan for our lives is far beyond our own limited vision. So often we want to know exactly how everything will unfold. We want to map out our future, control the circumstances, and follow a clear path that leads us to our desired destination. But what we fail to see in those moments is that God, in his infinite wisdom, sees the bigger picture, a picture that we cannot fully grasp in our limited human understanding. We're all familiar with the feeling of wanting things to go a certain way. We make our plans, we work hard, and we hope that everything will fall into place just as we envision. And when things don't go as we expect, it's easy to feel frustrated, confused, and even defeated. But what if I told you that the times when things don't go according to your plan are often the very moments when God is preparing something far better than you could have imagined? God's plan for your life is not just about what you can see right now. It's not just about today or even tomorrow. God sees the beginning from the end. He sees the potential in you that you may not even recognize in yourself. While you're focused on your circumstances, God is focused on your transformation. He knows what you need when you need it and how you need it. And sometimes the road to your miracle requires stepping into the unknown and trusting that God is working in ways you cannot yet see. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. He had a dream, a vision of greatness, but everything he went through seemed to go in the opposite direction of that dream. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, thrown into prison, and forgotten by those he helped. Yet through every trial, God was working behind the scenes. The very challenges Joseph faced were the tools that shaped him for the position God had prepared for him. What looked like rejection was actually God's redirection. What looked like defeat was actually divine preparation. When we are in the midst of difficulty, it's easy to question whether God has forgotten us or whether he's truly in control. But let me assure you, God has not forgotten you. He is always at work, even when you don't feel it. His plan is not a haphazard sequence of events. It is a carefully designed path crafted by the creator of the universe, who knows you intimately and has a purpose for every moment of your life. Trusting in God's plan means embracing the unknown, walking by faith, even when the path ahead seems unclear. It means choosing to believe that even in the midst of hardship, God is making a way for you. Every door that closes, every relationship that falls apart, every setback you face, these are not signs of God's absence, but signs that He is at work, aligning you with His perfect purpose. And here's the beauty of it: God's plan is not only about your future, it's about your transformation in the present. When we surrender to His will, we open ourselves to being shaped into the person He has always intended for us to be. God doesn't just want to fulfill your dreams. He wants to refine you, grow you, and mold you into a vessel that can carry out His greater purpose. The process may be difficult at times, but it's in those moments of growth that you begin to understand just how much God loves you and how deeply He desires to see you live out the purpose He has for your life. When you trust God's plan, you stop seeing your life as a series of random events or obstacles to overcome. Instead, you begin to see each moment as an opportunity to grow in faith, to deepen your trust in Him, and to align your heart with His. And though you may not always understand why things are happening the way they are, you can rest in the assurance that God is always working for your good, even when you can't see the full picture yet. When we talk about surrendering to God, it's easy to misunderstand what surrender truly means. Often we think of surrender as a sign of weakness, as though giving up control is a defeat. But the truth is, surrender is not about weakness, it's about strength. It's about having the courage to admit that we can't do it all on our own, and that there is a power far greater than us guiding our lives. Surrendering to God is not about losing, it's about gaining the peace, clarity, and freedom that come when we place our trust in His hands. Imagine for a moment the weight we carry each day, the weight of worry, stress, and the constant pressure to make everything work perfectly. Every decision, every challenge, every moment seems to be on our shoulders, and we feel as though the burden is ours to bear alone. But the reality is, we don't have to carry that load. When we surrender to God, we release the pressure to have everything figured out. We stop trying to control every outcome, and instead we trust that God, in His perfect wisdom, is already working on our behalf. Surrendering to God doesn't mean we become passive or inactive. It's not about sitting back and waiting for things to magically happen. Surrender is an active choice, a daily decision to align our hearts with God's will, to trust His timing, and to step forward in faith, even when we don't have all the answers. It's about being obedient, even when we don't understand the road ahead. It's about following God's lead, trusting that He is leading us exactly where we need to go, even when the path seems uncertain. When we surrender, we open the door to a peace that surpasses understanding. We stop fighting against life's challenges, and we start trusting that every trial, every setback is part of God's greater plan for us. Life becomes less about what we can do and more about what God is doing in and through us. We begin to see that His strength is made perfect in our weakness, that He uses our brokenness, our limitations to display His power. Think about the moments in your life when you felt like you were at the end of your rope. When you had no more strength to fight, no more ideas to try. It was in those moments when you surrendered your struggle to God that something shifted. It wasn't that the problem disappeared immediately, but suddenly there was a peace, a clarity, and a sense of hope that you couldn't explain. That's the power of surrender. It's not in trying harder, but in trusting deeper. It's when we stop striving and start relying on God's strength that we begin to experience the miracles He has waiting for us. Surrender also allows us to release the illusion of control. We may think that by holding on to everything, we're somehow protecting ourselves or securing our future. But in reality, all we're doing is binding ourselves to fear. The more we try to control, the more we're bound by anxiety, frustration, and uncertainty. But when we surrender, we let go of that illusion. We realize that God has everything under control. He is the one who holds our future, who knows the desires of our hearts, and who has already equipped us with everything we need for the journey ahead. Surrendering to Him doesn't leave us exposed. It covers us with His protection, His peace, and His guidance. There is freedom in surrender. When we release the need to control everything, we free ourselves from the weight of fear and anxiety. We no longer have to carry the burden of trying to make things work in our own strength. Instead, we can step into the freedom that comes from knowing that God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail of our lives for our good. We can rest in the truth that no matter what happens, God's plan is always better than our own. And He will never leave us or forsake us. The beauty of surrender is that it brings us closer to God. The more we surrender, the more we align our hearts with His. We stop fighting against His will and start flowing with it, trusting that His plan is not only good but perfect for us. We learn to lean on Him, to seek His wisdom, and to rely on His strength. Surrender doesn't push us away from God. It draws us nearer, allowing us to experience His love and presence in a deeper, more intimate way. In surrender, we find the peace we've been searching for. We stop looking to the world for answers and we begin to look to God. We stop trying to manipulate circumstances and we start trusting in His timing. We stop struggling with our own limitations and we start embracing His limitless power. Surrender is not the end of our journey, it's the beginning of a deeper, more profound relationship with God, where we find rest for our souls and strength for the path ahead. Miracles begin with faith. It may sound simple, but the truth in that statement is profound and life-changing. Faith is the catalyst that turns the impossible into the possible. It's the spark that ignites transformation. The incredible thing about faith is that it doesn't have to be big or perfect. The Bible tells us that faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. It's not the strength of your faith that matters most, but where you place it in the hands of the Almighty God, who has the power to change anything, anytime, anywhere. Faith is not just believing in something, it's trusting in someone. When we talk about faith, we're not talking about a vague hope that things will work out somehow. We're talking about a deep trust in God, knowing that He is faithful, that He is sovereign, and that He has the power to do what we cannot. It's about believing that He is in control of every situation, even when we can't see the way forward. Faith is a willingness to move beyond what we see, what we feel, and what we understand, and to step into the realm of the impossible, knowing that God has the final say. It's easy to have faith when everything is going well. When life is smooth and we can see the answers to our prayers unfolding before us, faith seems effortless. But faith is most powerful in the midst of uncertainty, in the moments when everything around us is falling apart and we have no clear way forward. It's in those moments that our faith is tested, refined, and proven. And when we choose to trust God in those moments, when we choose to believe that He is still good, that He is still working, even when we can't see it, that's when miracles begin to happen. Think about the story of the woman with the issue of blood in the Bible. For 12 long years, she suffered. She spent everything she had seeking a cure, but her situation only grew worse. Yet in the midst of her suffering, she heard about Jesus. And she didn't just hope for a miracle, she believed in the possibility. She said to herself, if I can just touch the hem of His garment, I will be healed. She had no guarantee, no promise other than the faith that Jesus had the power to heal her. But it was that faith, that belief in the power of God, that activated her miracle. Jesus turned to her and said, your faith has healed you. It wasn't her situation that changed her, but her faith in the one who could change it. Faith activates the hand of God. It's when we step out in faith, believing that God is who He says He is, that we see the impossible become possible. Think about the miracles you've witnessed in your own life or heard about from others, those times when everything seemed hopeless, yet somehow God made a way. Perhaps it was a healing when the doctors had no answers, or a breakthrough in your finances when you had no idea how the bills would be paid. Maybe it was a relationship that was restored when you thought it was beyond repair. Those miracles didn't happen because of human effort alone. They happened because someone dared to believe that God could do what seemed impossible. But faith doesn't always come easily. There will be times when doubt creeps in, when fear tries to overshadow the promise of God's power. When the storm rages around us, it's easy to lose sight of what God can do. Yet, even a small flicker of faith, even a mustard seed, can grow into something that moves mountains. Faith is not about denying the reality of our circumstances. It's about acknowledging the greatness of our God in the midst of those circumstances. It's about holding on to His promises and believing that He is bigger than any obstacle we face. Faith is also about perseverance. The Bible says that without faith, it's impossible to please God. But it also says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That means faith is not passive, it's active. It's persistent. It's the belief that even when things aren't happening the way we expect, God is still at work. Sometimes the miracle comes immediately and sometimes it takes time. But in every moment we are called to keep believing, to keep trusting, and to. God works in the impossible. When we face challenges that seem insurmountable, when we come up against circumstances that feel too heavy to bear, it's easy to fall into despair and believe that there is no way out. We look at our problems through the lens of what is humanly possible, and we start to think that if we can't fix it, then it can't be fixed. But God, in His infinite power and wisdom, specializes in the impossible. When all hope seems lost and every door appears closed, that is when God is ready to step in and make a way where there seems to be no way. If you look through the pages of Scripture, you'll see story after story where God took the most impossible situations and turned them into testimonies of His greatness. Take, for example, the story of Abraham and Sarah. They were promised a child when they were well past the age of childbearing. Human logic said it was impossible. The medical facts said it was impossible. The world's understanding of biology said it was impossible. And yet, in the midst of their impossibility, God made a promise. He said, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" And when the time was right, in a way that only God could orchestrate, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, a living, breathing miracle, the child of promise. God worked in the impossible, and through their obedience and faith, His purpose was fulfilled. There's a reason why God often chooses to show up when things seem most impossible. It's because He wants to demonstrate that it is not by our own strength or ability that things happen, but by His power. It's in the impossible that His glory shines the brightest. When we are faced with situations that are beyond our ability to control or comprehend, we are invited to trust in a power greater than ourselves. And in doing so, we get to witness firsthand the miracle of God's intervention. Think about the Red Sea. The Israelites found themselves in a situation that seemed hopeless, trapped between the Red Sea and the Egyptian army. No amount of planning, no strategy, no human effort could have saved them. But that's the very moment when God made a way. He parted the waters and the Israelites walked through on dry ground. What seemed impossible, a sea that could never be crossed, an army that could never be outrun, became the very path to their deliverance. God worked in the impossible, and He will do the same for you. It's easy to forget that our God is a God of miracles, a God who thrives in situations where we see no way out. How often do we limit God by our own understanding of what is possible? We look at our finances, our health, our relationships, and we see walls that cannot be climbed, storms that cannot be weathered. But we serve a God who is not limited by human limitations. When the doctors give a diagnosis, when the bank account shows empty, when the relationship seems beyond repair, God is still working in the background. He is never defeated by what seems impossible to us. He is the God of the breakthrough, the one who can turn your situation around in an instant, not because of what you can do, but because of what He can do. And God doesn't just work in the impossible for others, He works in the impossible for you. Maybe you've been waiting on a breakthrough, praying for a change, believing for a miracle. And yet you find yourself standing in the same place, facing the same difficulties, wondering when or if it will ever change. But take heart. God sees you. He hears you. And He is not bound by time, space, or circumstance. What feels impossible to you today is nothing to God. He has the power to shift things in a moment, to change your situation in ways you could never expect. He may not come when you want, but He is always on time. And when He shows up in a way that leaves no doubt that it was His hand at work. When we are up against the impossible, we are often left with two choices. We can either give in to fear, frustration, and doubt, or we can hold on to faith and believe that God is still at work. It's in those moments of challenge that we need to remind ourselves that God does His best work in the impossible. When we are weak, He is strong. When we don't have the answers, He is the answer. When we can't see a way, He is the way. And the beauty of it is that it's not dependent on our strength or ability, but on His power. He delights in showing us that nothing is too hard for Him. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Look at the areas where you've seen God work in the impossible. Maybe it wasn't how you expected it, and maybe it didn't happen in your timing, but looking back, you can see God's hand all over your story. That is the same God who is working in your life right now, even when you can't see the full picture. His power is not diminished by your situation. In fact, He is waiting for you to trust Him, to believe that He is able to do exceedingly, abundantly more than you could ask or think. God works in the impossible because that's where His power is most evident. So when you face what feels like an insurmountable challenge, remember this God is not intimidated by your circumstances. He is not limited by your fears. He is able to take what looks like a dead end and turn it into a doorway to something greater. What may seem impossible to you is just an opportunity for God to show His greatness. And when He does, all you will be able to do is stand in awe of the miracle that only He can bring. Letting go of doubt and fear is one of the most powerful steps we can take in our journey of faith. Every day we face situations that challenge us, that try to undermine our confidence, and that stir up the uncertainties of life. Doubt creeps in when we can't see the way forward, when the road ahead is unclear, and when the weight of our struggles seems too heavy to bear. Fear grips our hearts when we face the unknown, when we are confronted with the possibility of failure or loss, and when we wonder whether we have what it takes to overcome the obstacles in front of us.